Hello, and welcome to the Coach Right podcast, where we explore how to turn coaching expertise into published pages. I'm your host, Helen O'Neill, portfolio career specialist, accredited future of work coach, author and creator of Coach Right 90, the writing programme specifically designed for coaches. You can get the episode show notes and your free guide to publishing options at coachright.co.uk. It's time for the next chapter. Hello, and welcome to episode 5 of the Coach Right podcast. I'm your host, Helen O'Neill, recording on Saturday the 11th of October 2025. My guest today is Robbie Swale, leadership coach, host of 2 podcasts, The Coach's Journey and The 12-Minute Method, and author of the 12-Minute Method series of books. I've long considered him an informal mentor, having discovered Robbie's work with coaches back when I was doing my coach training. The Coach's Journey podcast now has over 100 episodes, and I've listened to them all. I feel incredibly privileged that he agreed to guest on the Coach Right podcast before it had even officially launched, when our paths had only very lightly crossed. I'd like to think I'll leave the ladder down like that when this show is over 100 episodes in. And it's made me reflect on the age-old debate about coaching and mentoring, what they are, when they overlap, when each is useful. Historically, mentors were often for the young or the more junior, while coaches were for the more mature or the more senior. There's been an evolution in our perspective as our approach to owning our own development has evolved, and many of us have some sort of seasonality or diversity within our careers that means we seek out guides, teachers and other helping professionals as the need arises. And while the coach purists might cringe, I quite like that we're seeing the emergence of the coach mentor. It's the space I operate in, and client feedback suggests I'm not alone in valuing this approach. Most of the time, our job as coaches is to help clients find the answers within. But as people push the boundaries of their careers and step into spaces where they need to find the answers externally, sometimes the mentor hat is the right one to wear. Of course, it's all down to meeting the client where they are, being super clear about contracting, and through the process, balancing the need for the client to work on self with the need for them to take action. There is one core difference, though, that strikes me. Coaches are those we work with directly. We seek them or are provided with them to support us through a moment in time, a growth focus, a change to navigate. The industry is increasingly moving to a differential between those that are professionally trained and accredited and those who simply decide to call themselves a coach. But mentors can be anyone that's walked the path you want to follow. In reaching mastery, they're often motivated by sharing their expertise for the benefit of others. These are the writers, the podcasters, the trainers and the teachers, the speech makers and the thought leaders. You don't need permission to learn from them. You don't even need to know them. Sometimes a mentor might become a coach. Sometimes an informal mentor might become a formal mentor. And sometimes the mentee-mentor relationship might be a partnership where both people learn from each other. This is why the Coach Right 90 programme was built around a coach-mentor blend, because when you're writing your first book, you've internalised a lot of what you need to know to be an author through years of being a reader, and coaching can help you surface that. And then there's the stuff that sits behind a curtain, the practicalities of how to find an editor or how to actually publish your book. I'm fortunate enough to have learned from many more experienced authors and publishers than I am in the independent author space, and I'm always amazed by how the narrative is at the forefront of innovation. You don't need to look very far at the moment to hear people talking about AI in any industry, but I first heard about it before mainstream access was a thing from the independent author space. The early adopters have completely assimilated the tools into their processes, and the laggards are tentatively testing out the free versions and finding their way. With every leap forward in innovation, there are risks and there are opportunities. And the same is true with the digital revolution we're living through just now. And it's the opportunities I've been learning about this week. We've all heard of SEO, or search engine optimization. Very simply, this is how the information you put on your website or in your content helps you be discovered when people are searching the web, which is brilliant. But people are starting to use AI to consolidate information on the internet, which is where GEO, or generative engine optimization, comes in. Now, I am not about to claim that I'm an expert on this, but I'm starting to think about how I can adapt what I do to leverage this new capability. From what I gather, whereas SEO was very much about keywords and backlinks and domain authority, GEO is more focused on context, on quality of content and the meaning behind what's being said. This is why we're starting to see the re-emergence of blogs, longer form content that supports thought leadership, that strengthens brand and authority. What I'm curious about is what generative engines will think about all the AI copy and paste content we're seeing all over the place right now, and whether this will be a help or a hindrance. It's a subject I plan to keep close to, and over the coming weeks and months, I'll make sure to share as I learn more. The future is getting closer every day, and I'm pleased to share that I'll be running a free masterclass on the topic of your future of work on the 5th of November 2025. As we move towards the end of the year, it's time to consolidate and to think about what we want our futures to hold. I very much believe that in order to thrive, we need to learn the skills that are uniquely human while shaping lives that serve us and contribute systematically to the kind of world we want to live in. If this is a topic that's on your mind, come along at midday GMT on the 5th of November. It's completely free and you can register at heleno'neillcoaching.com/FOW25. I'll pop a link to that in the comments and I hope to see you there. For now, it's time for the next chapter and the interview with Robbie. Welcome to the Coach Right podcast. My guest today is Robbie Swale. Robbie is an executive coach, author and podcaster whose work focuses on leading in complexity and meaningful productivity. Alongside his coaching for leaders and entrepreneurs, he delivers coaching, training and facilitation for organisations across sectors. He's the creator of the Meaningful Productivity Blueprint, which is available for free at robbieswale.com. He's the host of 2 podcasts, The Coach's Journey and The 12-Minute Method, and the author of the 12-Minute Method series of books, including How to Start When You're Stuck and How to Create the Conditions for Great Work. Welcome to the show, Robbie.
It's great to be here.
Thank you very much for joining me. So let's start by asking you to tell us about you and your coaching practice.
Yeah, well, you/we in that intro have done like a pretty good job. Yeah, the way I think about my coaching is that really at its heart, I love coaching leaders and entrepreneurs, but that it has a broad definition for me. I notice that I have a tendency to choose how to define words. And so sometimes I know that, I remember having a client years ago who, we were talking together about her not feeling like she was a leader and wondering if she belonged in my coaching practice. And, I won't tell all the details, but you can't imagine the level of leadership this woman showed in her family and her community, and just because she didn't have a team of people reporting to her or the word exec or the letter C at the start of her name, she didn't think of herself as a leader, but she was in all kinds of communities, being a leader. So I think about that as being people who they're often kind of slightly maverick people, but they're trying to do some work that they think is important. And as you said, some of that is about complexity and how we relate to it. Some of it is about what I call meaningful productivity. And then, like you said, there's a fairly new framework that you can get on my website, robbieswale.com, about that. And that also all translates over to the work that I do with coaches. So a little by accident, about 8 years ago or so, I can't remember exactly how long, I created an audience of coaches by writing writing an article, a long read article. When somebody cancelled on me, I decided to do something cool, and I wrote a long read article about how I got my coaching business to full time. You can find that still it's now on thecoachesjourney.com, amongst other places. And that has led to a part of my business called The Coach's Journey, which is where I support the coaching industry, because I think that all the problems we have around complexity, And many of the world's challenges are really helped and supported by the craft of coaching. And too many people quit coaching because the business of coaching feels too hard. Too many people who have the potential to be amazing coaches don't end up getting to do as much coaching as they want. And my contribution to that is the Coach's Journey, which is a big website full of resources, videos, articles, and a podcast with more than 100 episodes, which is how we connected. And and so and on there, crucially, which people might be really interested in, is what I think a model I call the coaching business flywheel, which is my attempt to boil down what are the only things coaches have to do, absolutely have to do, can't avoid doing if they want a sustainable coaching business, and also how you can turn them into a virtuous cycle if you put time and energy in over years. So there's that, and we haven't even talked about books yet.
No, which is the next question, and I do have a little bit of an advantage here because obviously I've heard some of this story before on the Coach's Journey podcast. But tell to everybody about how that long form article then led you into your publishing process.
Well, it's actually slightly different way around to that. So the long form article about growing the coaching business definitely led to the Coach's Journey, but the writing actually started before that. So that came out of my personal coaching, so my work with my coach at the time. And the coaching business was starting. I was probably like a year in, and as part of that, like there was something about writing there. I'd have to kind of go back to old notebooks or something. I should probably do this. There was something about writing there for sure. Now I've written in different ways for a long time. I wrote for school newspapers, sent absurd numbers of emails when I should have been working in boring jobs, all these kinds of things. But when the business was starting I'd been going about a year, around 2016, I was working with a coach, and I was feeling all this anxiety and what I would now call resistance after Stephen Pressfield's ideas about what I called at the time sharing myself with the world. And so Joel, the coach I was working with at the time, and we worked on various practices for that. I shared a poem on LinkedIn, which is like a crazy first thing to do, if you think back. I wrote, kind of used a storytelling framework that originates with a guy called Ganz that Joel put me onto to kind of write another article. And then in the end, we created this practice. Joel said this magical thing once in a coaching session, which is that he used to be a painter, and he said, "Do you know, Robbie, when I was a painter, I used to really like painting a series of paintings." And out of that came this idea that over the next 2 weeks, I was getting the train into London into Waterloo from Clapham Junction, where I lived at the time. And I thought I'd write an article on the train. We'd already played with the idea of the train a few times in creative ways by that point. Once for each day I was going into London in the next 2 weeks. And I wrote 5 blogs on the train. And the game was to get rid of the resistance and just get into the practice of sharing was write while the train's moving, stop when it stops, proofread it once, post it online. And I managed to do that 5 times. And I decided to post them on LinkedIn because no one read LinkedIn back then. It's kind of more of a blogging platform now, but it's hard to remember. For those of you who can't remember or weren't on LinkedIn in 2016, it did not have the blogging platform in the way that it does now. Nobody used it. I think my friend Alex was probably just starting to use it about that time, and nobody else that I knew had ever used it. And so that was the start. And after that, it didn't feel like fun or nice to do that. It was kind of riddled with it's kind of a pretty excruciating process. But it's a bit like, I don't know, going for a run on a cold morning. It's like you don't want to do it, but then you come back and you feel kind of awesome, even if you simultaneously feel tired, achy, and because you don't normally run, your ankles like in a bit of pain, you still feel kind of awesome. And that was a bit what it was like. And so I made it a weekly practice between that was about September and Christmas. And it's been a weekly practice ever since. So we'll hit 9 years of weekly articles in August. And after a while, I stopped getting the train. So I checked how long it took that day when I realized I wasn't going to get the train as much. And it took 12 minutes that day, which is funny because it almost never takes exactly 12 minutes to get from Waterloo to Clapham Junction. And so ever since then, I've been setting a timer. And that's why my series of books is called the 12-Minute Method series.
Amazing. So how do you go from these articles that you're writing on the train and posting with trepidation on LinkedIn to a series of 4 books?
Yeah, so about, 2 years in, I really like the, I don't know what you call him these days, author, I guess, marketing expert, Seth Godin. So I follow his work a lot. He's kind of influential for me in getting through my struggles with creativity and sharing my work. And about a couple of years in, so that blog started in 2016, and about, I don't know, 2018, maybe 2019, yeah, probably mid-2019 or early 2019, Seth published this absolutely spectacular thing that they loosely called the Behemoth, so or Behemoth, that's how you say that word actually, isn't it, I think. So it's like, if anyone's watching a video, I'm like doing the gesture, it's probably like 2.5 feet long, like 18 inches across, about, I don't know, 6 inches thick. And it was kind of this beautiful pulling together of all his blogs from the last some years. I can't remember how many years. And something to do with that was going on. And also, I was having this thought that it's one of my ways to get through the resistance to publishing my work, to sharing my work in any ways, which is like, how many people would need to benefit me doing this thing for it to be worth doing? And unfortunately, for everybody who's resisting writing their book or whatever, the answer is always one. It turns out, like, as many times as I ask that question, I want it to be like, it'd need to be worth it for 3,000 people. If I really think about it, if one person comes across the blog post, it was worth me getting over myself and writing this blog post. If one person is like the thing that I'm scared of writing, if for one person it shifts something, it was worth me being scared and posting the thing. And I basically had this idea at the time that, like, it was quite hard to find my articles. So for, like, my mum and my friend Paul, who, as far as I could tell at the time, were the only people who read them, even if they really, and I remember thinking of those two, even if they really wanted to, like, check if they've read all my articles, it would have been really hard to do, because it's hard for me to find my own blogs on LinkedIn, let alone other people. They're all on my website now, but at the time they were only on LinkedIn. And so I thought, well, maybe I could just put these together in a book, a bit like Seth did. And then I thought it'd be funny, because I could call the book, I wrote this book in 12 minutes.
Yeah.
And at that point, I got one of my friends in to help, who at the time worked as a copy editor. And we had a great coffee conversation, and he asked a great question, which was, it's a cool title. Because it kind of said, I mean, he said something like, it kind of says, if Robbie wrote a book in 12 minutes, like, really, I have no excuse for not getting on and doing this thing that I haven't been doing for a long time. And the crucial question was, can the book also deliver on that promise? And that, for me, is when things started getting quite interesting. What I did was I printed off, I tried to think what that would mean. Like, what would a book that delivered on the promise of that title actually mean? And I realized it would be something about helping people win their creative battles, get through the things they're resisting doing for a long time, and it would probably guide them through the creative process. And so I sat down with my coach at the time, a woman called Katie Harvey, different coach by then, and I mapped out for one of our sessions what that process might look like what I'd learned about that. And then I printed off 3 years of blog posts, and I dealt them out into 4 piles. And they basically all went. So it turned out, so 2 magical things at that point became apparent. One is that 12 minutes a week for 3 years was about, I can't remember, 120 articles and 80,000 words.
Yeah.
So just to let that sink in, 12 minutes, once per week, 3 years, 80,000 words. And I just think this is like of course that's true, right? Of course, in the end, if you sit down for 12 minutes at a time over a number of years, you're going to end up with 80,000 words at some point. And I wouldn't have necessarily guessed it would be 3 years, but maybe I would have got it, maybe I would have said it would be 5. I don't know. But you can't kind of, I don't know, like, it's still, you can see it on my face, it's still kind of hard to compute. It's just this idea that we don't really know what concerted action over a long period gets us. We don't really have a sense, I don't think, a good sense for that. We probably can kind of visualize what you can do in a day. But to know how that compounds over years, I just think is a really hard thing. So that was one amazing thing, 80,000 words. And the other amazing thing was that, like, of those 80,000, like 78,000, if you squinted a bit and tweaked a few words here and there, were about the creative process. And so then I worked on that as a book for a while, one book about 80,000 words, until later in the publishing process, which we can get to if you want, I decided it would be better if, I tried to get into the question, I think this is a good question to ask in the modern publishing industry, what choices will be in best service of this book and its audience? Yeah. And so one of the questions was, So there's a tactically good reason for having a series versus one book, which is that it makes it a bit more evergreen. And if somebody buys one, they might buy the others, and which is why all your favorite authors, everybody, write long series, because it's how they make their money. And at the same time, for me to make that decision, I had to ask myself, what will be in best service of this book and its audience? And would there be an advantage in selling it separately? And for me, there was, which is that some people struggle with the whole creative process and want to learn about all of it. And some people, they're just struggling with that last bit like I was. Like, how do I share this work? And then you can just buy book 4, which is how to share what you've made. And if you're struggling at the start, you can buy book 1, which is how to start when you're stuck. And if you're struggling in the middle, you can buy one of the other 2. And so that is how we end up with a series of 4 books.
Amazing. So you've got to this point where you've got 4 piles that are going to become 4 books. How do we get them? Well, actually, let me ask one other question first. So I love the whole idea of messy action. And I love the fact that you've got this 12-minute method, proofread it once and get it out there. Obviously, when you're writing a book, there's sometimes a little bit of an editing quagmire that goes before that publishing process. So you touched on your friend already, but how else did you kind of manage that editing process before the book went out into the world?
Yeah. I mean, it is a quagmire. And like, I always want to be the voice. So I have a set of people in my life who I think of as the writers I know.
Yeah.
And I have written more books than all of them. And it makes me a little emotional to say it because there are these books written by these amazing people that are not in the world. Mm. And as much as they are better writers than me with speech marks, they are not better writers than me because no one is reading their books. So the editing quagmire, just like all the quagmires of the creative process, are really dangerous. Be really careful with that, everybody, right? Because I've read some draft books by these friends that I have. Some of them work colleagues, some of them coaches. Like, they're great. By many, many measures, especially the 12-minute books, they're better than the 12-minute books. But they're not, because they've been read by 10 people, right? And so I was lucky because I had the 12-minute thing. So I deliberately, it was actually a little tricky assignment for the editors, because the editor's job was not to make it smooth or to make it perfect or even to improve it as much as they could. The aim was to do as little as possible on the editing of those books so that they flowed better, were in more service of the reader, and preserved the messiness. Yeah. Because as soon as those books get too polished, they lose everything for me. And then that means that if you read it, you'll read some kind of rubbish ones, some kind of rubbish chapters. Luckily, the chapters were all written in 12 minutes, so it doesn't take you long to get through it and onto the next one. There are kind of, I mean, you know, we try to get rid of the typos, and with the books, you're creating something more permanent. And so I think there is a higher, you know, like it's easy for me. If I spot a typo in one of my blogs, it's easy for me to fix that. It's a load of hassle for me to fix the typos in the books. So you want to try and avoid them at first. And I actually had 2 different editors. I wanted, and we can get to the publishing. So I ended up self-publishing these books. I had an offer from a small independent publisher. I queried a couple of others. I did a lot of learning about the publishing industry. So this was about, the first book I think came out late 21. So this is like 2020, 2021. I was like really trying to understand where publishing is right now, which is really hard to do because it's been so disrupted over the last decade. That would be my take. So I was really trying to work out how to do it. I had a kind of self-publishing team that I worked with directly on the first 2, and then they stopped what they were doing partway through. It's a little. They and I had a disagreement about whether we had an agreement that they would work on all 4 of them or not. And then I used some of that team for the last 2 and some different people. So I had a set of different people working on it at different times. It is important to edit it. It's more important and I should say, like, so I've got my next book will come out late 2025. Been working on it for probably as long as the 12-minute books in some ways. But it's a different thing. It's something like, I cut like 25% out of it this year, but it's going to be something like 60,000 words. Okay. And I think it's my experience of writing is just like the difference between writing a 200-word blog post and a 10,000-word blog post is big in terms of the editing job. Trying to hold 60,000 words in yourself, in your being, is really hard. And it definitely helps to get somebody else involved at that stage. The other things that other people can do is they can just have separation from the work in a way that you can't. So there are lots of important benefits of having other people look at our work at the right process. But most important thing, it has to come out. Otherwise, it's doing nothing.
I couldn't agree more. It's I remember, I think my first book, I did 7 rounds of edits before I sent it to a professional editor. And then I was just like, once they've seen it, it's done and it's going out. And if someone tells me there's a typo, I'll go back in and change it later.
I have this great quote in the start of the Share book, the green one, the last one, from a French poet called Paul Valéry. I'm sure he said it, it was like Paul Valéry or something, but he said in French, translated, a poem is never finished. For the one anxiously seeking perfection, a poem is never finished, it is abandoned. Yeah. So at some point you have to abandon your work. It's not finished, it's never finished, not if you're, as many of us are bred into by education systems in countries like this, a kind of perfectionist, punished for every mistake. It's never finished, but you're going to have to abandon it at some point. And look, the one that I'm working on now, I will have edited it personally, countless times, dozens probably, and other people have been in it, some professionals, some not, at different times. So I do think that is important work, and again, can't say it often enough. Like, it's not even doing half its job until it's out in the world.
Yeah. And how do you pull that team together? Because that team is really important in that partnership of actually getting the book into the world too.
Yeah. So what I learned from the publishing thing, so I had this offer from a small independent publisher, and the contract, the person wasn't right for me. But when I was doing that, what I loved about it was the idea of having a team of people who were as good at their bits of the process as I might be at mine, or ideally better. And so I love that idea. And it's really hard to do. It's hard to find. It's hard to find people you trust. If you're somebody like me, it's hard to do the trusting. And I was in a real practice at that point in my life, and particularly in my business, of, no, I have to collaborate more. One of my mentors, Robert Holden, says something like, the next level of success always requires a new level of collaboration. So I was really in that, and I was like, okay, how do I do that? Well, I'm going to trust these people. I'm going to pay them, and then I'm going to trust them. I think like Readsy is a good resource. If people haven't come across that, it's like a kind of marketplace for publishing. Friends, so the guy who had that initial 12-minute thing, he worked on the second half of the process with me. Like the cover designer that I used for those books, I'm going to use for the next one as well. He was a referral from, so I made a connection via Readsy into a team, and he was a kind of referral from that. And like, I would say these days, asking people for that, go and look up, if you're looking for a cover designer, go and look at book covers. See if you can find out who did it. If you can't, email the author. Because unless they hate their cover, they're probably going to tell you. Mine was a guy called Stefan at a company called Spiffing. They've changed their name, Spiffing Books or something like that. And Stefan's work is amazing, his cover design work. And then you pay different amounts depending on what you want to pay and that kind of thing. And so, on Readsy, you can have like a bidding process. So I did some of it there, some of it personal connections, some of it referrals. And I was trying to find people. So a crucial part in the process for me was I read a book called Let's Get Digital by a guy called David Gockran.
David Gockran, yeah, great book.
Yeah, it's a really good book. And I'd never really heard anybody make the case for, I knew about self-publishing or independent publishing, however you want to call it, by then, but I'd never heard somebody make the case that in lots of cases it was a much better option. So I'd heard of people make the case that it's a good option, but never heard somebody make the convincing case that for all the ways and times and places and people and authors and books, that it might be a better option than traditional publishing. So that was really important. And I was kind of looking, I was like, who's somebody a bit like, I want somebody to work with this on who's like, who believes that in the way that he does. And so actually the way I into that team originally was somebody who was interested in the marketing side, which I would say was kind of useful. Like I learned some stuff from that, but more useful was getting the team around that, really.
Yeah. And what was it from David Gockran that made you believe that independent publishing was right for you?
Good question. It's hard now because I've internalized so much of it and then I've experienced so much of it. But look, my experience with this very nice small publisher who had published a book that I absolutely love. Like, that's why I went to him. I was like, I'm pretty sure I want to self-publish these. It kind of makes sense for the 12-minute thing. Like, why would I? But then I was like, yeah, but if I was going to get one publisher, who would it be? And I basically looked at the books on my shelf and saw one that I absolutely love that kind of had a similar format. And I was like, it would be them. Maybe there were two. It would be these two. And I wrote to them and ended up getting the offer from one. For me, the shift is, if you have an entrepreneurial side, why would you give away all the reasons you have to be entrepreneurial about something like a book? So like that would have been, in this case with this publisher, I'd have been signing that away basically. And in exchange, I would have been giving away some of the risk. And I would have been, so you know, basically the way, for people who don't know, you basically just give away, often you give away some of the risk to the publisher, i.e. they will front up the cost for the editor and things like that. But you also give away money on it, probably forever. And that's an interesting exchange. And for me, as somebody entrepreneurial and creative, I didn't want that, right? I thought I did, and then I read it and I felt into it, and I was like, no, I don't want that. And what Gottgren does really well in that book, and it gets technical in some parts, but that was quite useful because it kind of showed me I didn't want to have to learn the ins and outs of Amazon's publishing machine alone first time round. Like I wanted some help with that. I'm like, you know, I can do that stuff, but it's not my zone of genius. And so I knew I wanted somebody to help with that. But he also made the case for like how you can make it add up and how you can make these things work and I guess like really it was less what he said and more his energy. And you can, he's on lots of podcasts and things that people can listen to if they want. But, you know, just this energy of entrepreneurialism and this sense that actually for lots of, I think it was like, because obviously he's writing a lot of fiction as well as nonfiction. I'm in the nonfiction space, but particularly he was just making the case that lots of fiction authors were kind of, you know, winning in the chart battles despite being independent, were making way more money than their traditionally published counterparts. Some of them were kind of wishing they weren't tied in with big publishers for a long time. Now, of course, if you're in the like, you know, top 0.5% of Penguin Random House authors, or someone gets a publishing offer from, you know, I don't know, what is it, like Alan Page or whatever, then take those offers, okay? But at the same time, that's not everything.
Yeah.
And yeah, and so I think that whole self-publishing, independent publishing space it's quite exciting. Yeah. And it's a bit like the Wild West, and there are kind of, you can pay and give as much as you want, from paying somebody a lot of money to do all the work to doing it all yourself. Probably with AI, you can do even more of it yourself, even more skillfully now. And so everybody's really got to find out where they want to sit for themselves now, which is annoying because there's a lot of choice. It's like a 21st century problem of abundance, but it's hard to navigate. And just while I'm on that, so Gottgren was really useful. Also really useful was an organization called Jericho Writers, based in Oxford. And I found them through a really random thing. Someone recommended an old Writers and Artists yearbook publication, but they said like the old one was better than the new one. And so I was like, oh, that's annoying because it's out of date, but like better. So I looked up the guy who'd written that and found out he now runs this thing called Jericho Writers, which is a really nice writing community. And so that was really, I can't remember, the membership cost like £100 a year or something. And I used that to learn about the whole publishing landscape over the course of a year. I went to like 2 or 3 of their kind of summit things that they ran, and they were just good people. I wanted to kind of get a sense of the UK as well, because I'm aware that although you can have a good market for books across the world, like I was like, I'm interested in the UK and being grounded here. So they were based in the UK, and I learned loads from them. So if people want good quality resources, access, lovely community stuff, they're a good place to go.
And it's interesting when it comes to independent author communities. I think what I've noticed is, regardless of what industry you're in, there's always a little bit of competition, except for the independent author community. And the reason that I always say that probably is because, you know, realistically, we're going to write a book a year, best case scenario. I don't know about you, but I read quite a lot more than that. And so that just removes that, because actually I want you to publish more books because I want to read them, and I want you to help me to publish my books because I want you to read them, and so on and so forth. And so it's almost like its own little flywheel, to use your analogy. And I just love that. So I think the fact that you've found your own community to help you through the writing process in those early stages is really, really key. And that probably leads quite neatly into, obviously, you're embarking on your next project, and presumably you didn't have. Is this still blog posts, or is this something new? Or how?
Some of it, I have published some of it. I get quite interested in this. I think that like the idea that a book is only shared when it's finished is a kind of old world traditional publishing idea. And so I published, like in the pandemic, I published drafts, like they're pretty old drafts now, of some of this book on my website. But no, it was written in a more traditional way.
And so how you approach that differ?
Good question. And I'm also kind of scanning, because there's probably things that are in future ones I'll do the same and do different. It was similarly a slightly accidental thing. I didn't kind of decide I wanted to write a book. I know some people, that's been their dream since they were, a little boy or a little girl. That, at least consciously, hasn't been the case for me. Came out of coaching again, this sense of like, what's a thing that you'd be excited to share with me if we met up in a few months? And this book gradually emerged from that. It was like a battle to get a first draft. I think, I don't know how we are with language on this show, but we can paraphrase Anne Lamott to say our messy first draft, right? But so it was a kind of really rubbish first draft. But the skeleton of it is the book now, still. And it took then, I used like particularly one test reader. I had this incredibly generous test reader, and super grateful to him, to expand it, essentially. So I asked a set of people to do it. I was like, I don't know where this came from, but I need to be a bit more rigorous with this. And so I asked a bunch of people to do it. A bunch of them said yes. Only he actually did it, to like read through, and I had some prompts for them, like what bits need expanding on, what bits should be cut, what bits don't make sense, some more nicely phrased version of that. And that grew it from that, and work with an editor grew it from about 17,000 words to about 80,000 words over the course of a few drafts and a couple of years. And so that was probably like 2018 into 2020. I finished a draft so that I could submit it to publishers in 2020. And then it's been like eating away at me ever since. In 2022, I said on The Coach's Journey, you might have heard me say it to Jennifer Garvey-Berger, that it had been sitting around for a long time and she'd really inspired it, and I would publish it, and it's still not out. Oh. So this year is the year. Because I don't know if you're the same, but it's like I have other book projects, I have other creative projects, but I can't do them until this one is out of the system. So I could, in theory, abandon it. But then who would I be? Because what do I stand for? I stand for sharing the thing, even if I don't know if it's good enough. So unfortunately, I'm a victim of my own myth at that point, and I have to publish it. And and then when I go back to it, I went back to it in August last year to kind of make that decision. Actually, like I found my notes from it when I was working on it this year, and I was like, the first note is, this is easily good enough to publish, in caps. So you have to kind of trust those bits of you sometimes. And then the last part of the process has been the process of like, it's a bit like you said about your book, deciding this is the year, 2025 is the year to abandon this particular poem, and working out how to do that. And that involved me cutting a whole part of it. It was a 3-part book. It's going to be a 2-part book. I'll probably do something with that 3-part book, because it's got like 20,000 words in it, and they're good. They just don't quite tie together to the rest of the book enough. Like, so there'll be something else. There might be blog posts. There might be a little ebook that people can have for free or something. And they're also, it was interesting. They would have been they're basically about how we relate, how our politics work, how our morals work. And that was super current in like 2019 when I was finalizing that bit. And it's a little less current now, is my sense. And it distracts a little bit from as I learned as I worked on the last kind of couple of drafts of it, like what is the point of this? What is actually the point of this book? And I'm going to get it wrong, but most of the fiction I read is fantasy fiction, and there's a guy called Brandon Sanderson who, speaking of authors of series, is definitely like I heard an interview with him. The amount of money he makes from his books just blows my mind for how big you can be as an author of fantasy novels. And he is an excellent author and a fascinating thinker, very smart human. He says that writers tend to fall into 2 camps, and I've forgotten the language he uses, but some are planners, so they start with a plan, and for some the first draft is the plan. And I'm definitely the latter, and well, in this case, so it's been a discovery of what the book is really for. But it is funnily enough, going back to the first question that again, that same original coach Joel asked me, like, what's the thing I said to him I'd love to share with you that I'd written a book? And he said, well, what's the thing? And it was like, well, is this new worldview that I have been creating for myself valid? Like, that was the question. And that is still exactly what the book is about. But I'm just better at talking about that, or I will be by the time the book comes out.
Fantastic. And one of the things that people are always fascinated about is the kind of tools and techniques behind the scenes. And obviously AI has come onto the scene since you first started writing. So what tools or technology do you use to help with your process?
Yeah, so for the 12-minute writing, I keep a list. Let me show you it, because I want to make really clear how technological this is. Here's the list. This is, for people who are listening, I think the most scruffiest bit of paper you've ever seen in your life, from a hotel that I stayed in for some work once. And it's not that I started there, I just steal pads from places that I do work. And it's got like lots of scribbled out bits and then some barely legible other things written on it. So we can, this is a great one, a really good one. I've got no idea what this is. And so these are the prompts. So the crucial part of the process for me is, do I capture the idea when I have it? Because I don't want to lose those ideas. There's this really nice Stephen Pressfield thing. So Pressfield wrote a great book called The War of Art, which is a super, if I was to recommend one resource to writers, I would recommend that. And if for some reason you really don't like Stephen Pressfield, because some people don't like his style, you can read Big Magic by Liz Gilbert, which is like a beautiful kind of yin and yang fit with The War of Art. Pressfield has this great thing where he takes a dictaphone out with him everywhere he goes, like an old school one. Maybe he's upgraded, does it on his phone now. And he'll record the ideas when they come. And he says there's nothing like hearing an amazing idea you've forgotten about in your own voice coming back to you. But listen to this one. This is so good. What if your soul gets injured at work? Who do you sue? And where is your insurance for your soul injuries? That's great. I've got no idea how to turn that into an article, and I don't know if I did at the time, but I definitely don't now. But there you go. You've got this kind of stuff on there, and then it also says Cynefin, which is the Welsh word for a complexity model, which is the last blog that I wrote. So in fact, I'll cross that off now while we're talking. So that is the most important one. I use Word like everybody, and I am pretty confident I will never use AI for writing or drafting for anything that I will call my writing craft. Mm-hmm. And I am 100% sure that the blurb of my next book will be written by ChatGPT. And I upgraded my ChatGPT recently to see what it could do in terms of editing this next book. And honestly, I was a bit shrug. It didn't really catch much. It was quite hard. It was quite hard to get it to know the things that a human would know. Like, I'm not interested in cutting the about the author section. I know it's irrelevant to the rest of the book. Like, it'll get better at that stuff. And also, my book was already heavily proofed, and so it's possible that it did catch a few double spaces and things. But I found it a little bit underwhelming for that at this stage. But by the time people are listening to this, there'll be new ChatGPT versions out. Claude might be better, I don't know. So I think from a technology point of view, I'm just trying to think. There is more technology is involved at the point of publishing than the point of writing for me.
Yeah. And I love the fact that you, let's be honest, the reason why we write is because we love writing. There's something quite magical about taking the idea that you've scribbled onto a piece of paper and turning that into a piece of content that's going to add value to somebody else. Why would you outsource that to a computer? And
yeah, exactly.
Marketing copy, unless you're a professional marketeer, and if you have the money for a professional marketeer, fill your boots. But for the rest of us, let's just get AI to do that.
It's tricky. I think it's worth paying attention to what you would happily pay somebody else to do as part of your process. And look, people ghostwrite books. My friend of a friend, I had some great conversations with her about the books she'd ghostwritten. And it's that's a thing. And if that's you, then that's perfect. And you can get ChatGPT to write your book or pay somebody else to do it. That doesn't feel right to me. But would I, even if I don't have the budget, would I spend money on getting somebody to write a blurb for my book when I'm a probably 70% standard blurb writer? No, I'd probably just write it myself. But given it costs £20 to have ChatGPT for a month, why wouldn't I get that to read my whole book and draft it? And to tell you, the blurb it wrote for the next book was really good, even just one try. Just one try. I couldn't believe it, really.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And You touched earlier on actually getting the book onto the platforms and getting it into the hands of the readers. Can you talk us through that for as well, please?
Yeah. So I decided, partly because of David Cochran, partly because of what I learned from Jericho writers, and partly because of what was in service of the books, to go along the self-publishing route. And that involves basically, you have to get, it's the actual publishing is like a very easy and slightly confusing thing. You have to go on a website, upload a PDF, upload a JPEG, which is an image file, and then press publish, make some decisions, fill in some forms. Like, that's it. It's pretty confusing and hard to know what decisions to make, so it's kind of worth... I liked having somebody else to help me with that. And there are lots of places to do that, and ChatGPT could actually do like a lot of it now for people, I would guess. You know, I would, if I was thinking this, I might do this for this book that's coming out. There's a guy whose blog I like. I used to read it a lot when I was in it, called Nicholas Eric. Do you know him? No. He's worth checking out. I got onto him from Jericho. And I was thinking what I might get ChatGPT to do is, can you go and read all of Nicholas Eric's website? Then you are Nicholas Eric, and I want you to write me a marketing plan for this book, and then have a long dialogue with it about that. I could pay Nicholas Eric, or I could just email him, because he's pretty good value on email. But I thought that's the kind of thing I might do. And you could probably get it to help you through the confusing... Like, I use ChatGPT to help me set up my internet and try and fix my dishwasher and things like that these days. Yeah. You could probably I think it'd be in its strength zone, helping you decide whether to put your price of your paperback higher than the price of your ebook, or which of these options to click when you're in the settings. And so, really high level, mine are published on Amazon, which means you can buy them. They print on demand. It's absolutely insane technology. If people have got Prime, they'll have their book in their hands. That it didn't exist when they pressed order. It'll be in their hands within 2 days, sometimes. And at the same time, mine is also available and distributed by an organization called Ingram Spark, which means you can order it online in Waterstones or
your local bookshop, and
Barnes and Noble, or your local bookshop and things like that. And and it's unlikely that my books are on many shelves, but as David Cochran probably says in Let's Get Digital, which is the book of his that I read, no one buys books proportionally from the shelves anymore. So there's that. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. That's probably that. And then there's a piece, I guess, after that about why do people buy our books, and when and how. Yeah.
And why do people buy your books, and when and how?
Yeah, good question. Who knows? Who really knows?
And I suppose more to the point, how do you think about that when you're writing the book?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, look, my attitude to this stuff, and this is true for coaches in all aspects of their business, and it's definitely true for writers, is don't write a book if it's about a goal other than writing the book. Mm-hmm. So for coaches, for example, I've got this model, the Coaching Business Flywheel. It says these are the only 5 things you definitely have to do to have a coaching business. None of those 5 things is write a book. Now, writing a book can help, but you don't have to do it. And it's a pretty, I would say generally, there are loads of easier, faster things to do if you want to create more work as a coach than write a book. Writing a book is hard, and unless you get ChatGPT to do it, and it's unclear if and whenever it'll lead to a client in and of itself, right? Probably never. The amount of income you get from a book is way lower than it would be by finding one other client, in a year, especially by the time you've paid your editor. I'm sure I'm technically in a loss for all 4 of the books, individually and together. Of course, that's not the point of them from a business point of view. So it's really important to say, if you want to get some more clients for your coaching business, go and follow the Coaching Business Flywheel. Have lots of conversations with people, make some connections, do that kind of thing. Don't write a book unless you also really, really, really want to write a book. And so my view would be, the reason to write a book is because your soul is calling you to do it, and you can't, much as you want to put it off, you can't do it. And my story is really interesting. I have a really warped. It's really hard for me to say that I love writing, and to be honest, I don't know if I'm a coach first or a writer first. We had a bio that you wrote, but I don't know. But it's hard for me to admit that. It's taken deep work for me to kind of get to that place where I'm owning that part of me more. And so people listening may also be in that case. where we have quite a lot of scarring about art, including writing from, I think, education systems, well-meaning parents, all that kind of thing. So it's hard to know if you really, really want to write it. But underneath, we have to really, really want to write it. And then we get to that rule that I was talking about before, which is success is one person reads it and it has an impact on them. I mean, in one of the 12-minute books, I think probably the last one, there's a bit about, actually, by sharing your work, you are already changing one person because you're changing the person who shares it. I mean, you can say that the writing changes the person. My view is it's when the writing meets the world that the bigger transformation is for almost everybody. And that if you are only writing for yourself, it's not that there's no value for you, but a big part of what shifts in us is when it's possible, it's out there, when we're not only saying, this is what I believe, but here I am, come see me, which is why it's terrifying. So yeah, write it as though no one will read it, and then sell it so people, you can try and get people to read it. And a good question to ask, this is a Robert Holden question, is, you ask yourself when you're thinking of publishing a book, what is success for this book? And then when you've got the answer, you ask yourself the killer question, what is real success for this book? And real, you have to imagine it in italics and underlined. And you'll get a really different answer always. The first one is probably about selling books, getting clients, and the second one is about something that is of actual meaning. And so for me, that was people reaching out to me to say, I've been wanting to do this thing for a long time. Again, it still touches me years later. I've been wanting to do this for a long time, and then I came across your work and I've finally done it. And once I knew that was real success, then how I sell the books becomes a whole different ballgame. Because all I'm trying to do is, and thank you for this chance to do this today, Helen, all I'm trying to do really at that point is tell the story of the books. Because then whether people buy the book or not, somebody is going to hear this and go, wait, what? I just start and keep going, and then I'll have 80,000 words.
Yeah, absolutely. And that leads really neatly to the last question I'm going to ask you, because I think a lot of coaches that I speak to do have that niggle in the back of their head where they're like, I want to write a book. I know I need to write a book. I don't know where to start, or whatever barriers there are for them. But what advice would you give to coaches who are at the beginning of their journey and are aspiring to write a book?
Yeah, so the first one would be really check where that desire is coming from. If that desire is coming because coaches write books or successful coaches write books, then you want to be really careful with it. Because my guess would be the reason speech marks successful coaches write books is because successful coaches have often had a lot of coaching for themselves, and then they end up doing the things that they really want to do. Not because you have to write a book to be a coach, right? So be really careful of that. But assuming you've done that and it is an inner calling, I have a line in the first page, or the start of How to Start When You're Stuck, which is inspiration is always around, but it's when we make a start that we let inspiration in. Nice. So for me, it's like you have to start. You have to start. Like the number. I also have some be carefuls, and so the third book is called How to Create the Conditions for Great Work, and I'm really, I probably over egg in the intro to that book. Be really careful reading this book. Your job is not to create the conditions for perfect work, right? Because the number one condition for great work is you have to start, and the number two condition is you have to keep going. So until you've mastered starting and keeping going, forget everything else. Forget having the right book, the right tool, the right idea. Just start and keep going and see what happens.
Yeah, brilliant advice. Thank you so much, Robbie. It's been an absolutely fascinating conversation. I could talk to you all day. Can you tell listeners where they can find you, your services and your books online?
Yeah, so for coaching-related stuff, it's www.thecoachesjourney.com, and we're also on LinkedIn and Facebook. And that's just full of resources. There's a free ebook about the coaching business flywheel that I was just talking about. There's, like we said, 100 podcast episodes, videos, articles, loads more. Mostly about the business of coaching, the craft of coaching. But there is loads of writing on there. If you want to read me writing about coaching as directly as possible, that's the place to go. My broader coaching work and the 12-minute blog is all at robbieswale.com. So you can read the blog there, you can subscribe and get it sent to you whenever it comes out. You can buy the books there, you can buy them on Amazon, you can buy them on Waterstone's website and wherever you want. And you can get the first 7 chapters of how to start when you're stuck by subscribing to the 12-minute blog if you want. So that's another thing. Is there anywhere else? Coach's Journey podcast is on all your favorite podcast platforms. There's also a 12-minute method podcast, which is like a 1-season wonder so far. Maybe I'll bring it back. And that has got an episode where I spend 12 minutes talking about publishing the 12-minute method books. So you can find that out if you want a little bit more on that. And of course, and also you can search me, last thing. So what I decided for how I was going to market the books was the one thing that makes everything else easier or unnecessary when it comes to marketing my books was get the rest of the series out. And the second one, somehow from that emerged this idea that I would try and appear on 100 podcasts and tell the story of the 12-minute method books 100 times on 100 different podcasts in 2022. So also, if you search Robbie Swale on your favorite podcast platform, you'll find loads of those. And I did it in the end. I got to about 103, I think.
I remember that. I do.
Yeah.
Thank you, Robbie. That was brilliant.
Total pleasure. It's been an absolute wonderful way to spend some time.
Thank you. Thank you for joining me today. You can get the show notes and your free guide to publishing options at coachwrite.co.uk. Remember to subscribe and leave a review on your podcatcher of choice. Your words can make a difference. A review can too. If you'd like to connect, find me on LinkedIn, O'Neill Helen, that's O'Neill, Oneill, or on Instagram at Helen O'Neill Coaching. I'll see you for the next chapter of Coach Write.